At 1:48 in the morning, a car pulls up to a quiet house in a quiet neighborhood in Frederick, Colorado. A woman gets out. She's tired. She's been traveling. She has a carry-on bag over her shoulder, and she's 15 weeks pregnant. She hugs her friend goodnight, walks to the front door, goes inside. That's the last time anyone outside that house ever saw Shanann Watts alive. A few hours later, her husband stood on the front lawn of that same house and told a television camera that he had no idea where his wife and daughters were. He said he missed them. He said he needed them. He begged for their return.
The best right now to figure out if they can get a scent and see where they went. If they went on foot, they went in a car, or they went somewhere.
He already knew exactly where they were because he had put them there from the outside. The Watts family had everything. A 5-bedroom house in a new suburban development in Frederick, Colorado. 2 little girls. A baby on the way. A husband with a steady job. A wife who documented every moment of their life on social media for hundreds of thousands of followers. They looked happy. They looked like the kind of family you see in a home insurance commercial, but appearances are the most dangerous thing in the world. Chris Watts was born in North Carolina. Quiet, introverted, the kind of man who rarely caused a scene. He worked as a field operator for Anadarko Petroleum, a steady blue-collar job that paid well enough. Shanann Zuchek was everything Chris was not. Loud in the best possible way, energetic, warm. She had battled lupus, a serious autoimmune disease, and won. She had 2 difficult pregnancies and pushed through both of them. She sold nutritional supplements for a company called Lavelle, Thrive, and she was good at it. Her Facebook Lives had thousands of viewers. She was the kind of person who made you feel like she was talking directly to you.
So, Rachel, you're so funny.
They met on Facebook in 2010, married in 2012. And in December of 2013, their first daughter, Bella Marie, was born. Bella, 4 years old by the summer of 2018, curious, smart, old enough to ask questions, old enough to understand things she shouldn't have had to understand. 2 years later, in July of 2015, Celeste Catherine arrived. They called her Cece. Tiny, loud, full of energy. The kind of little girl who could turn a grocery store, trip into an adventure, and by the summer of 2018, Shanann was pregnant again, 15 weeks along, a boy. They had already chosen his name, Nico. From the outside, this was a family on the rise, but behind closed doors, the foundation had been cracking for years. In 2015, the Watts family filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, nearly $450,000 in debt, a mortgage they could barely afford, credit card bills, medical expenses from Shanann's lupus treatment. The bankruptcy was discharged, but the financial pressure never fully lifted, and something else was happening, something that Shanann had started to feel, even if she couldn't name it yet. Chris was different, distant, cold in a way he had never been before. He told her he wasn't sure about the pregnancy. He told her he wasn't sure about their marriage. What he didn't tell her was that since May of 2018, he had been having an affair. Her name was Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker. She was 30 years old. She later told investigators that Chris had told her he was separated, that the marriage was essentially over, that she had no idea he had children at home or a pregnant wife. For Chris Watts, by the summer of 2018, his wife, his daughters, and his unborn son had become obstacles, and what happened next would horrify an entire nation. August 12, 2018, Shanann had been away on a business trip in Arizona for 5 weeks. She had spent that time building her business, posting to social media, and texting her husband, who had become increasingly cold and non-responsive. She didn't know he had spent those 5 weeks with Nicole Kessinger. Trips, dinners, an entire parallel life, Wong Ti. At 1:48 a.m. on August 13th, Shanann arrived home. Her friend and co-worker, Nicole Atkinson, drove her back from the airport. Nicole later said Shanann had seemed anxious on the drive home. She knew something was wrong with her marriage. She just didn't know how wrong. She went inside. She went upstairs. She got into bed beside her husband. We don't know exactly what was said in that room. We know from Chris's own later confession what happened. He told her the marriage was over, that he wanted out. Shanann, 15 weeks pregnant, exhausted from travel, carrying the weight of a failing marriage she had been trying to save for months, told him that if he left, he would never see his daughters again, according to Chris Watts. That's when something inside him broke. He strangled her in their bed, in the dark, while their 2 little girls slept down the hall. Shanann Watts, 34 years old, 15 weeks pregnant with Nico, was gone. And then 4-year-old Bella walked in. She had heard something, or felt something. The way children sometimes do. She looked at her father. She looked at her mother's body on the bed. She asked him, "What are you doing with Mommy?" Chris told her Mommy wasn't feeling well, that they needed to take her to the hospital. Bella, 4 years old, believed him. Chris loaded Shanann's body into his company truck. Then he woke his daughters. He told them they were going on an early morning trip with Daddy. He drove them, both girls still in their pajamas, toward the Anadarko Petroleum oil field, site near Roggan, Colorado, an hour's drive. Shanann's body in the back. The girls were alive for that entire drive. Think about that. When they arrived at the oil site, Chris took Celeste from the truck first. He used her own favorite blanket, the one she slept with, every night, and he smothered her. Then he carried her small body to one of the crude oil storage tanks. The opening was 8 inches in diameter. 8 inches. He pushed her through. He went back to the truck. Bella was still there. She had watched what happened to her sister. She looked at her father and she asked him, "Is Daddy going to do to me what he did to Cece?" He used the same blanket. Bella fought. She struggled against him. She was 4 years old and she fought with everything she had. Her last words, "Daddy, no." He placed her body in a second oil tank. Then he buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. And he drove back home, got changed, and went to work. Later that same morning, Nicole Atkinson tried to reach Shanann. No answer. She tried again and again. Shanann was never hard to reach. She was always on her phone, always posting, always responding. Nicole showed up at the house. She knocked, she called, she texted. She could see Shanann's car still in the garage through a window. She could see Shanann's shoes, and the ones she never went anywhere without, still by the door. She called the police. Frederick. Police arrived at the Watts home on the afternoon of August 13th. Chris Watts was there. He let them in. He answered their questions calmly. He said he didn't know where Shanann was. He said they'd had an argument that morning. He said she had just left. Officers noticed something. He wasn't crying. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't the way a man whose pregnant wife and 2 young daughters had just vanished is supposed to be. He was calm, almost eerily calm. The next morning, August 14th, Chris Watts stood outside his house and gave a TV interview. He looked directly into the camera. His eyes were dry. He said, "Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. If somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody." Here, while he was saying those words, investigators with search dogs were working his property in the background. You can hear them in the footage, but what broke the case open was a neighbor's doorbell camera. Nathan Trinastic lived across the street. He had a security camera system that recorded the street outside. Police asked for the footage. They watched it, with Chris Watts sitting right beside them. The footage showed the early hours of August 13th. The quiet street, no activity, and then Chris Watts, loading something into the bed of his company truck, long, wrapped. They watched his face as he watched the footage. The FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation joined the case on August 15th. Chris agreed to a polygraph. He failed it badly. Detectives brought his father, Ronnie Watts, into the interrogation room. They left them alone together. Chris told his father what he had done, then he told the detectives. But the story he told was not the truth. Chris Watts' first confession was a lie. He told investigators that he had told Shanann he wanted a divorce, that she had flown into a rage, that he had looked at the baby monitor and watched her smother Bella, then smother Celeste, that he had walked upstairs and strangled Shanann in a fit of grief and rage. He was blaming his murdered wife for murdering their daughters. Detectives didn't believe him. The evidence didn't support it. And on August 15th, Chris Watts was arrested. It wasn't until February of 2019, 6 months after the murders, sitting in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, that Chris Watts finally told investigators everything, all of it. In a 5-hour recorded interview, he described strangling Shanann in their bedroom. He described the drive to the oil field with his daughters alive in the truck. He described smothering Celeste with her blanket, pushing her body through an 8-inch tank opening, and he described Bella. He told investigators that Bella had asked him if he was going to do to her what he did to Cece. He described her fighting back beneath the blanket, a 4-year-old girl fighting for her life. He described her last words. "Daddy, no." The investigators in that room, men and women who had seen things most people will never see, were visibly shaken. One of them later said it was the hardest interview he had ever sat through. On August 16th, 2018, the day after Chris Watts' arrest, investigators searched the Anadarko petroleum site near Rogan, Colorado. They found Shanann first, in a shallow grave just feet from one of the oil tanks. 15 weeks pregnant. Then they drained the oil tanks. Inside the first tank, Celeste, 3 years old. Inside the second, Bella, 4 years old. Tanks had openings of 8 inches. Each girl had been forced through that opening by the man who was supposed to protect them from the entire world. On November 6, 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges. 5 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body. He accepted the plea deal to avoid the death penalty. On November 19th, he stood before Judge Marcelo Kopkow for sentencing. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Ruchek, addressed the courtroom. Her father looked at Chris Watts and said, "We loved you like a son." Judge Kopkow called the crimes, and I want you to hear these exact words, "perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime I have handled out of the thousands of cases I have seen." Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, 3 of them to be served consecutively. He will never leave prison. He is currently held at a maximum security facility in Wisconsin, moved there for his own safety after other inmates threatened to harm him. Kessinger, his girlfriend, cooperated fully with investigators. She told them she had no idea he was still married, that he had lied to her about everything. She was never charged. Netflix released a documentary in 2020, American Murder: The Family Next Door, built almost entirely from Shanann's own social media posts, texts, and home videos. It became one of the most watched documentaries on the platform.